As we've discussed, the Senate vote didn't go the way Democrats hoped, which means that if Alito's final majority opinion is anything like the leaked draft that we saw, Roe v. Wade is likely to be struck down. And you know that 26 states are certain or likely to ban abortion the minute that happens, leading to a whole patchwork of abortion laws in this country. In fact, several already have trigger bans that would criminalize abortions, possibly even for the patient. Now, look, as a former federal prosecutor, there are so many questions that come to mind, but it begins with this. How would one go about enforcing a violation of that law? It's the prosecutor's job to charge and prosecute those who break the law. We obviously have a burden of proof, and we have to prove our cases beyond a reasonable doubt, which requires evidence. We have to rely on an officer to identify a lawbreaker and then arrest that person. I'm curious as to how will that arrest happen? Is it an anonymous tip? Is it monitoring surveillance cameras at medical offices? Is it word of mouth? As we talked about with Senator Cortez Masto, already there are reports of a firm selling location data of people who have visited abortion clinics. And there are growing concerns that maybe even menstruation tracking apps could have been subpoenaed to show when a pregnancy starts and stops. Could that be collected to help prove someone has had an abortion? And how would prosecutors, I'm asking this seriously, how would prosecutors obtain medical records without violating privacy laws? Would those trump? Will they have the probable cause search a woman's home for medication, perhaps, or obtain her personal gynecological history records, such as when she was expected to ovulate, or proof that she was no longer or at one time was pregnant? Will it be a violation of her Fourth Amendment rights against an unreasonable search or seizure? Do we get a search of the medical office? Do you question the nurses and receptionists about the patient's medical history? How about our statements to her doctor or to a relative or maybe a spouse? Would spousal privilege attach to those statements, and who would own that privilege? Will I be required to have a practitioner perform a medical examination to confirm that she was pregnant and has had some form of medical procedure to terminate the pregnancy? I mean, is there any way to have this crime on someone's record, so to speak, without violating medical privacy laws in the long run? Would she be required to consent to an examination, or will there be a Fifth Amendment issue related to her rights against self-incrimination? I can tell you, having been asked a false accusation, and let's just say I am able to get all of the information to bring this charge, how will I prove that her pregnancy was not the result of a rape or incest? Because if she's in a state where there are exceptions for either one of those, it's going to impact my case against her, right? Do I have to have a mini trial beforehand to prove that she was, in fact, a victim before I can keep going with her own prosecution? Or will the burden be on her now to prove that she, in fact, was the victim after I've given my case in chief? And let's say I could actually prosecute. How do I voir dire my jury? Would we be inclined to strike every juror who is pro-choice or pro-life? Do I inquire as if it were a case of somebody being a victim of a crime themselves or a police-involved shooting, whether they or someone they know has had an abortion? And what do I do with that answer as a voir diring prosecutor? And what is the sentence that I would be asking for? Is it akin to a homicide, as it is in some jurisdictions under their trigger laws? A misdemeanor or manslaughter? And what about a prosecutor who we've already spoken to who exercised their discretion not to pursue the charge? Or what if one prosecutor in the office decides to prosecute women, but another declines to do so? Is it in fact luck of the draw for the accused at that point? Not exactly equal application or justice under the law. All these questions, I'm wondering, do these render the law as symbolic perhaps as today's vote has been accused of? You see, overturning Roe, it may put the focus on the judicial branch. And today's vote puts the focus squarely on the legislative branch. But as a prosecutor, I was part of the third co-equal branch, the executive. And our job was to enforce. So how are prosecutors supposed to do that? It may end up back in the states, but it's going to land on a prosecutor's desk. So how exactly do we define or pursue justice. Exactly. We'll be right back.